stream with Colorism Healing. Yours truly, Dr. Sarah L. Webb. This is weird because I increased the font size on my phone, and so like all of the comments are huge right now. Hello, hey Fabian. Welcome, folks. So today's topic is going to be a continuation of last week's conversation on colorist friends. Last week I shared 10 warning signs or red flags that your friends might be colorist. And so this week I want to talk about how do we deal with colorist friends. So let's say you go through the list of warning signs and you're like, yeah, my friends are definitely colorists, or definitely are dealing with some colorism stuff. What now? What next? What do I do? How do I handle that? So that's the conversation I want to have with all of you today. Please, you're welcome to share your experiences with dealing with colorist friends, as well as your advice or tips for other people. I am not a relationship expert by any means, and so this is not professional advice the way, talk to your therapist or your other social worker, other professionals who deal with, relationship dynamics on a professional basis. So this is based on just my observations, experiences, listening to other people, things I read, so my advice. And that's why I love the collaborative conversation that we have with the live streams, because all of you always provide excellent insights and advice and ideas yourselves as well. So please keep that coming today. Also, say hello, introduce yourself. Let me know where you're watching from. Y'all know how I like to start these off. And let me see if I can work with this large font today. Welcome. I see a lot of regular names. Thanks for the badge, Jandel Crutch. Woohoo. I am Nail Egyptian. Hey, I finally caught your live. Exciting. I'm so happy that you decided to join us today. Hey, Clouds Blush. Hey, Keisha. Hello, Black Knight 0626.2, hot Atlanta, Georgia. It's time to run. Interesting. Are you a runner? Oh, we got some, I am Nail Egyptians from LA. Fabian says I need larger fonts in my life. Oh yeah, the background. We're definitely a Saints family. I'm not like a super huge football person, but I like the New Orleans Saints because I'm from Louisiana and my family, grew up being really diehard fans of them. I also think they're the team with the most swagger, but I'm biased. Hey, Armando Rivera, 1989, aka Jorge. Welcome. Says, yes, I am preparing for a marathon in December in Huntsville, Alabama. That is so cool. That's exciting. See, I like learning these little details about y'all. I love it. Hey, Trey Lorraine, welcome back. Hello, everyone. Happy to be back for another live in California here. Woohoo. Yeah, I got lots of family in California, too. Keisha says, who that? Yes. All right. So let's jump right in. I have 10 tips that I'm going to share, as well as, reading your comments and questions along the way. And so for those of you who just tuning in, I'm picking back up where I left off last week. Last week, I only got to talk about the 10 warning signs of colorist friends. And so this week, I want to make sure to bring up the rear with 10 tips for dealing with colorist friends. A couple of things I want to establish before I get started. One is that how you deal with the sense of urgency that you feel in dealing with colorist friends depends on what your skin tone is. And so the dynamic of having a colorist friend is very different if you are light skinned and your friends are colorists. That dynamic is different if you're brown skinned and your friends are colorists. And it's very different if you're a dark skinned person who has colorist friends. And so I'm going to be sharing these tips from the perspective of being a dark-skinned person who has colorist friends, okay? But they could definitely apply to other dynamics as well. But I think the stakes are much higher in terms of how you navigate a friendship that you realize is impacted by colorism. So my tips are from the perspective of being a darker-skinned person and how you might handle that. All right. So the first tip and I don't even know if it's a tip, right? I'm just going to go through 10 points that I have, okay? You can see them as tips or just points. The first one is to determine if it's even a friendship to begin with, right? And this might be obvious to many of you. I know I have a lot of actual social workers in the room, but decide if it's actually a friendship, right? And I think our culture, society has normalized less than healthy relationships that they feel normal, right? But what you might realize is that, you know what? Not only is this person colorist, but we don't even really enjoy each other's company that much. Like, we don't actually have that much in common. Like, they're only around, when they want to get drunk or something, right? And they're not actually like in my life when, my day-to-day life. They only know how to party, or they only know how to gossip at the water cooler at work, right? But we use the term friend so loosely. And so I think that's an important first thing to establish for yourself is this actually a friendship that's worth salvaging, right? Is this actually a friendship that I should invest energy into to have conversation or discussion about? And if it's not, then we don't even need to proceed any further, okay? Because then my next tip is to end the friendship or end the relationship. I know that sounds extreme or drastic, but you really have to be honest about, like, was this actually a valuable relationship to have in my life in the first place? Or is it just eating up my time? Is it just draining my energy? And so it's okay to end or leave a situation that is harming you too. It's okay to leave a situation that is negatively impacting you in some way. And it should not be considered extreme to act in your best interest, right? It should not be considered extreme to say, this is toxic and this is causing these legitimate harms to my psychological well-being, my emotional well-being. So I'm going to remove myself from the situation, right? And so those are the first two things. Like, you do have the option to walk away from the friendship, and thinking about, so even if the person is willing to apologize or change, sometimes there's been enough damage inflicted to not warrant continuing, right? And so you ending the relationship is not about whether or not they ever change, and it's not about whether or not you ever forgive them or move on. But sometimes there's been so much damage in a connection that there's not really anything there worth saving, even if the person does apologize and try to change. That doesn't mean you have to be in their life as they're changing. I talk a lot about forgiveness, and my understanding of forgiveness is not the typical mainstream discussion, right? Because I think I can forgive you and still not have contact with you. I think I can forgive you and still never talk to you again, right? So I think that's definitely an option. Let's see. Fabian says, what if they just don't love their own skin, so to speak? I'm going to come back to that. Clouds Blushes, I love that you started with the realest tips. Yeah, definitely. I had to, because I just want to, because you don't even need to worry about the other options if, one, they're not your friend, and two, if you just need to end the relationship, right? Like, everything else is secondary to that choice. Armando Rivera, 1989, thank you for the badge, friend. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. So Fabian, what if they just don't love their own skin, so to speak? And so I think you're talking about having a colorist friend who isn't negative towards other people, but they don't like their own skin tone, right? And so I think that is different from being in a relationship with a colorist friend who's causing harm to others, right? And I do think that in the example you're talking about, Fabian, it's probably not necessary to end the friendship, right? If they're sort of internalizing the colorism and they don't want to get darker, but they compliment other people who are darker, right? And so there are definitely a lot of people who are in that place or in that boat. And so I think, some of the other possibilities are worth looking at if you're not actively experiencing harm from that friend. And maybe part of the friendship dynamic is you supporting them on their self-love journey, right? You supporting them in their journey to deeper and more established sense of self-worth, right? But definitely, like, if the person is expressing colorism in a way that is toxic to you or that negates your worth or your value, or even other people, to be honest, even if it's not directed at you, if you are darker skinned, it is still indirectly negative towards you. So here's an example. You have a light skinned friend who has never called you ugly, but they call all the other dark skinned people around you ugly. Like, that's still causing harm to you, right? Because you see that they are expressing disdain and hatred towards darker skin, and you as a darker skinned person are implicated in that, right? And so, yeah, part of, me also saying, like, don't really take this as quote unquote advice is that every friendship is so unique, right? Like, your particular context and your particular history with that person. And you know what I mean? Like, so it's so personal, and every situation is going to be so unique that these are just broad strokes to think about and consider as you come to your own conclusions, right? Okay. Romantic relationship, town, friendship, light-skinned women made a colorist comment after 19 years. We have not spoken since, and I am good. Yeah, so you kind of draw the line in the sand. And again, the reason why I distinguish between being a dark-skinned person and navigating colorist friendships versus being a lighter-skinned person is that I feel like for a lot of lighter-skinned people, it's not a deal breaker to have a colorist friend. Like, for me, kind of like Black Knight 06, 26.2, for me, it's a deal breaker, right? Like, as a dark-skinned Black woman with a wide nose and afro hair, like, it's a deal breaker. But there might be, I also have a lot of non-Black people, and I have white people who follow my page, right? So a white person could have a light-skinned Black friend who's colorist, or a dark-skinned Black friend who's colorist. And because they're white, they are not implicated in that, or they are not receiving harm or experiencing the violence of that. And so they might put more effort into salvaging the friendship. They might put more effort into educating the friend or helping them see their biases. As a dark-skinned person, though, like, we don't have to do that work. We don't have to do that emotional labor for the colorist people in our lives, right? Because we are already just trying to survive the colorism itself. So yeah, thank you for that example of even after 19 years, still drawing the line in the sand when it comes to colorism in any relationship. All right, let's keep going. Lucid Low says a lot of light-skinned women think saying, I want to be dark-skinned, or I've always loved dark-skin. Do you think they are being disingenuous to reflect from the fact that they are colorists, or do you think they do envy dark skin? Lucid Low, this is a great point. I definitely think it's often a deflection. I definitely think it is often a dismissive comment or a way to distract from the real conversation of colorism. Similar to that, I hear a lot of light-skinned women say, well, I used to tan. I used to tan a lot, to get darker. I used to wish I was darker skinned. And oftentimes, I mentioned this in my monthly email, right? Like, it's off topic. It's beside the point. It's beside the point, Like, that's like saying, oh, I wish I had, like a skinny person saying, oh, I wish I had more curves. That's beside the point when we're talking about fat phobia, right? And so, like, even if that is true, it's also very much hypothetical. And so it's easy to hypothetically say you want it to be darker, but would you actually follow through with that if it were an option for you, right? Like, would you actually be comfortable in darker skin, right? It's easy to like fetishize it or say, oh, it's so beautiful and I would love to be darker. But do you then also want the social consequences of a darker skin tone, right? But I do think that they can admire darker skin. But if you're having a conversation about colorism and then they insert that, I see it as being beside the point. Like, it's off topic, like you wanting to be darker skinned when you were a child has no bearing on the conversation about colorism. So, okay. Thank you, Lucid Los, for the badge. Thank you so much. I love my crew. Oh, Sable. Okay. Try to talk with them what bothers you. Let them be aware that you want to be treated with love the way you show them. If they don't take you seriously, say goodbye. So Sable, thank you for that, because that brings me to my next 2 points, right? And I know you're one of my German friends, and so I forgot how to pronounce your last name. I don't know if I ever knew your last name, but I remember doing the Ioto workshop with you, and so I'm not going to butcher your screen name at all. But thank you for that point. It's very important, because it brings me to my other 2 points that I wanted to make, is that if you think it's a friendship worth saving or worth working on or worth investing in, have a conversation and see how they respond, right? So points 3 and 4, 1, you can point out their colorism, right? You don't have to point the finger, but you can say, hey, did you ever think that might be colorist, what you just said? Or did you ever stop to think about why you always ignore Black customers when they walk into the store, right? Or dark-skinned customers when they walk into the store, right? So you can point out their pattern of behaviors that you see as colorist and say, hey, this behavior or this thing that you always say is colorist to me and to other dark-skinned people. See how they respond, because then that's going to inform you about whether or not you should proceed with that friendship. And then a 4th point is to share your personal story. And I think I talked about this last week. I say so many things online, I forget when, how, and where I said it. But share your personal story, because some people will relate to that. And if they are really your friend, so here's the thing. If they are really your friend and you're saying, this hurts me, this makes me sad, this is painful for me, colorism, they should respond the way a friend would respond, right? And so I think the example I used before was, if you tell your friend that you lost your job, you just got fired from work and you don't have any other work lined up, and that friend says, oh, well, we all have problems, it ain't all about you. Cut them off. That's not your friend, right? And so similarly, if you tell them about how hurtful and damaging colorism has been to you personally, and their response is, well, I got bullied too, so it's not just about you. Like, I get told that I'm not Black enough, so. Even if they have their own stories to tell, like, that's not how you respond to a friend who is pouring out their heart to you and being vulnerable about the pain that they've experienced, right? And so actually having the conversations will tell you a couple of things. One, it will tell you if they're actually open to listening, right? If they are actually willing to show up as a friend and hear you out and say, okay, here's how I think I can do better. What do you think I could do better, right? To show up for you as a friend in that way. Or if they are dismissive or deflective, but they're really your friend, they'll come back around. They'll say, hey, I did not respond the right way. I was in my feelings. I didn't treat you the way you deserve to be treated. I apologize, and I'm going to change my actions, right? If they're your friend. But then on the other hand, they might not do that. They might not ever come around to seeing things clearly. They might not ever be able to self-reflect and see themselves, right? And to really accept that colorism is a real thing that has systemic consequences, but that very much also has personal consequences as well, and psychological consequences. And so in that case, again, you know that, well, the foundation of this friendship was probably faulty to begin with. And so I'm not saying that just because someone responds imperfectly the first time that they're not your friend, but usually there's a point where they come to reconcile. But again, I'm not a licensed relationship person. So feel free to get second and third opinions on that, right? A fifth thing, an alternative to sharing your personal story, and this might apply too to people who aren't dark skinned or to white folks who are, talking to their friends who are colorists or whatever, is to talk about it from the research perspective, is to talk about the systemic impact of it first. So maybe you're not ready to, or maybe you don't have a personal story to share, but you see that a friend is being colorist, you can say, hey, have you ever heard of colorism, right? Like that thing that you said or did, that seems like colorism to me. And here are the consequences of that in society, especially if your friend has that logical mind, right? So you also have to know your audience. And so some people respond really well to like the personal, emotional feeling story, and other people, maybe you have a friend who's an Aquarius and they're like all about, numbers and stuff like that. And so you're like, yeah, well, here's the social impact of that, right? Because Aquarians are the humanitarians. And so maybe you can appeal to that side of them, right? Talking about the inequality that is created in our culture because of colorism. But either way, whether you talk about it from your personal story or talk about the research, just having that one initial conversation will, again, give you the evidence you need about their openness to the conversation at that moment. And again, if this is like a best friend from childhood, and they don't react well the first time around, be open to them coming back around and saying, hey, I took some time to reflect on what you said and I actually see things differently now, right? Like that could be a thing. Let's see what you all are talking about. Miss Ashley V, are you saying that light-skinned women say things to make their friends feel uncomfortable? Some of them do, yeah. So the last live, I was talking about warning signs that your friends are colorist. And sometimes people are intentionally colorist and sometimes they are unintentionally colorist, which I also think matters in how you approach the situation. If you have friends that are intentionally saying hurtful things about people or about you, then that goes back to my first point about, are they actually your friend? But then more often than not, people are subconsciously colorist. And so they might not even be aware that they have this bias. And one of my TikTok followers asked me, well, how can you make people aware of their biases? And one very practical way is to have them take the implicit bias test. So Harvard University has an implicit association test on body size, age, race, gender, and other things, as well as skin tone. And so if they're that kind of person, be like, hey, take this test, right? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about your results, right? Yeah. So Sable says, you are welcome. Oh, Deandra. Okay. Welcome. Okay. Gypsy girl, I'm dark skinned. I had a boyfriend who is too, who literally said he didn't like light skinned people. And she acted like it. My mom, sister are light, so it bothered me. Can you speak about how this happens and give advice? I think I might, let me make sure I'm understanding this correctly. Okay, so really quickly, I'm gonna kind of give a quick, like on the fly tip to that, is ask that person, right? So if a dark skinned person is saying they don't like light skinned people, ask that person what experiences they've had with light skinned people that would make them say that. But then also acknowledge the fact that saying they don't like light skinned people is probably based on their experiences with light skinned people and not an inherent belief that light skin is inferior, right? And so I mentioned this in terms of people saying colorism goes both ways. And I say colorism doesn't go both ways, because even if a dark-skinned person expresses disdain or resentment or hatred towards a lighter-skinned person, it's usually because of how they've been treated by lighter-skinned people in the past, and not because they think light skin is inferior. Because colorism is the belief that dark skin is inherently inferior and that lighter skin is inherently superior. And so they probably have been scarred and wounded and traumatized in relationships with lighter skinned people in the past. And so there's a need to heal, and they probably need safe space to meet or interact with light-skinned people who are not colorist and who understand colorism and who understand the legitimate systemic and interpersonal marginalization that darker-skinned people feel. And I think a lot of light-skinned people who want to be in community with darker-skinned people have to realize that it's not safe for us if you're not consciously aware of colorism, right? So it's not safe for a darker-skinned person to be in close relationship with lighter-skinned people who are oblivious to light-skinned privilege, right? Because then that's where the harm is perpetuated. All right. Good question, though. Thank you. Welcome, D1. Always good to see you around the internet world. Clouds Blush says, LMAO, you said Aquarius, and I was thinking of my aqua friend when you gave that logical example. Yes, okay. I'm a Gemini, so I love my air signs, but aquas are like super intellectual. Let's see. Lucid Low says, what if it's a colorist light-skinned person that is a friend of the family or someone who hangs out with your group of dark-skinned friends? How do you get rid of them and still keep your life intact? Lucid Lows. I think this one might be above my pay grade. I'm keeping it real. I know my limitations. I'm going to stay in my lane on that one. Because I think that's a relationship dynamic that does probably require expert advice or perspective. But I will say that this is why it's so important and why at least having the conversation with yourself and doing the self-reflection for yourself is so important, because of the casualties that could ensue, right? The relationship casualties, like not actual casualties. Because my sixth point, I think I did 5. Yes. So the sixth point that I wanted to make is to ask a neutral party to mediate. And in my blog post, I warned against asking a mutual friend to be the mediator, because one of you could possibly lose 2 friends, right? And so I think it does require caution and discernment, especially when there are multiple networks of people involved, right? And so in terms of getting a neutral party to mediate, that could be a professional, or I guess that might be the only neutral party. But I would not actually have a mutual friend or a family member be the quote unquote mediator, because then one of you could possibly lose both of your friends, right? Or like your whole circle of friends. But I think boundaries can help a lot. So if you can't completely end the relationship, hopefully you can limit the amount of time or interaction that you have with that person. And I think I'm going to quit while I'm ahead, because I need to stay in my lane and not give advice that I'm not qualified to give. But one of my followers commented that having standards can be really lonely and isolating. And so people who don't tolerate certain types of behaviors sometimes lose entire groups of friends. Sometimes will grow apart from an entire network or circle of people. Because again, you have to question, you have to reflect on, if I explain to my other dark-skinned friends, or if I explain to my family how this person's behavior is toxic, how this person's behavior has been harming me, and they make no effort to support me, and they make no effort to try and find resolution amongst the group, right? Then are they showing up as friends in that moment, right? If I report abusive behavior and the people around me allow it to persist and don't hold the other person accountable, then are they relationships that I need to maintain and invest in, So yeah, I'm just having a conversation here. Again, I'm giving my disclaimer because I don't want anybody to lose a friend and then be like, I'm going to sue Dr. Webb. Okay. But yeah, that is a tough one. And that's also why I'm limiting my focus on friends and not family per se, because I think the way you handle the situation is very different when you can just walk away and not talk to someone anymore, versus if they're family or friends of a family, or like mutual friends, where it's a much more complicated situation where you will likely have to interact with that person again. Okay, let's keep going. So I just did number 6. Number 7. This reminds me of what Black Knight 26.2 said about cutting off this person that they knew for 19 years. And I said we should start treating colorist friends the way we treat racist ones. So many of us have a much easier time putting up boundaries with racist friends, with racist people, or, being blunt and direct and explicit about what's going on when it's racism. And it's much less hard. It's much harder for us to do that when it comes to colorism, because the people closest to us often deny it or gaslight us in ways. And just culturally, we're not supported in that, right? I think society supports us in removing racist people from our lives in a way that it doesn't support us in getting out of colorist friendships. But that's an option. These are options, you know. You don't have to do that. So three more things. Number 8. Well, I'm going to read some more comments because the next 3 things I think are really important. And I really want to take my time talking through these next 8 points. Lucid Low says, sadly, this has been my experience. It didn't end well for me at all. I am very sorry to hear that. So sorry. Thank you, Latanya R. Moore. Welcome back to another live. I love having you here. Sable says, but sometimes you feel so relieved when you disconnect. It hurts at first, but the people who appreciate you will come. Girl, yes. Thank you. Shout outs to my friends in Germany because you bring in the heat today. I need to repeat that because it's so good. But sometimes you feel so relieved when you disconnect. It hurts at first, but the people who appreciate you will come. And on that note, I'm going to go to point number 8, which is directly tied to that. And it's that know and believe that you deserve to be treated well and that there are enough people out there who will respect and love you. Okay? And so that's not so much a tip or a strategy, it's a mindset. But I think having that mindset that you really believe you deserve to be treated well. You really believe that there are people out there who would treat you well and who would love you and show up for you in ways that you need. If you take on that mindset and you really sit in that belief, it becomes easier to let go of the colorist friendships. It becomes a little easier to walk away from situations where colorism is constantly being perpetuated. Because I think sometimes we cling to those friendships because part of us fears we're going to be alone forever. We cling to those friendships because part of us is a little afraid that we're not going to find any other friends or no one else is going to accept us, right? And so believing that there are billions of people out there and several of them are not colorist. I can't say many or most, but several, there are lots. I don't know if it's the majority, but lots of people are not colorist or at least actively working through their colorism, right? And so I think really sitting in that belief can empower you in dealing with colorist friends. Yeah. Okay. Says exactly, you are worth it. So people need to treat you like silk from Sable. Yeah. Number 9 is a practical tip related to the point that we just made. And that's that I encourage you to continue to meet new people and or build on other existing relationships. So let's say you have 10 people in your circle, 6 of them are colorists. 1, continue to build the 4 relationships that are not colorist, that are healthy. Continue to invest in those relationships. But then also continue to meet new people, right? And know that the folks who are currently in your circle do not have to be the end all be all of your social circle, your friend circle, right? And I put this, what I called a pro tip, although again, I'm not a pro at relationships. I'm definitely not saying that. Is to look for instances where unhealthy dynamics feel healthy simply because it feels familiar and has been normalized. I think working this out with colorist friends borrows from or draws on healthy relationship practices in general, right? So there are certain dynamics that are mutually supportive, mutually beneficial, healthy, like actual friendships. And there are other dynamics that simply are not, right? And so sometimes colorism is the root cause of that. Sometimes selfishness, sometimes narcissism, sometimes abusive relationships or manipulation or just low self-esteem or competitiveness. Like anything can cause a relationship to be unhealthy. Colorism is definitely just one of those things. And so doing a lot of self-reflection about, you know, what do you really want and deserve and need in relationships more broadly and more generally can also give you clarity in terms of colorist friends specifically. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Lucid Low says, due to traumatic colorist experiences, new people scare me sometimes. I feel you. Yeah. That's literally post-traumatic stress response. Yeah. That's a very real thing. So I'm not going to invalidate that. I'm going to acknowledge that that's a normal, or a human, I should say, response to past traumas around colorism. And it can even be scary to meet other dark-skinned people when you've experienced a lot of colorism, right? Yeah. As I'm saying that, I'm thinking of like, how can I do like colorism healing meetups? Where like the folks on this live can like meet up in various cities around the world and be like, oh, I have a group of people I can meet with every now and then, but we're so far apart. We just have to be on IG Live and Zoom and stuff for now until we can teleport. You know, maybe once teleportation is available, then we could get together for real. All right. And so point number 10, my last point, I did good on time today, is to continue your own personal growth and evolution. Why do I say this? Well, I'm going to read it because I have it right here on the screen. As you raise your standards and raise the bar for your life in general, those who are meant to be active in your everyday life and those who are not will naturally sift themselves out. And so you can sort of indirectly deal with colorist friends by simply raising the bar for your life in general. And people who don't respect the new version of you, who are not in alignment, who don't vibe with where you're going with your own personality, your own development, they are naturally going to fall away, right? And you'll be left with the ones who are like meant to go with you on the next phase of your journey. And so those are my 10 strategies. Anyone who's watching the playback, leave a comment with your thoughts, your additional methods for dealing with this in the past. And I really, really look forward to the next week when I will be doing a topic that you all voted on, debunking common myths about colorism. So I put up for vote, colorist friends are myths about colorism. Colorist friends won the vote, but there was still like almost half of you voted for debunking colorist myths about colorism. So I figured there was enough interest in it to still do it, even though this week's topic was a little more popular. I still think there were enough votes for colorism myths that it's worth doing. Also, you know, I like the Mythbusters type of approach to lives anyway. So I'm excited about that. As always, if you have other suggestions or requests for topics I can talk about in the future, you know where to find me. You know where to reach me. I see a couple more badges. Thank you, Sarah, from the Mixed Bloom Room. Thank you, friend. Did I miss anyone else? Let me make sure I did not. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I think I called everyone out. So Jendelle Crutch, Armando Rivera, 1989, Lucid Los, Latanya R. Moore, and Mixed Bloom Room. Thank you for your support. And thank you to everyone who tuned in live and contributed in the chat as always. Or if you didn't chat, you watched. And so that means the world to me. And if you're watching the playback, listening to the podcast, or checking out the YouTube channel, I very much value your time and your attention and your contribution to this very important conversation. So I'll hit y'all up next time. And yeah, I look forward to getting to connect again next week. Bye. Mwah.